This is John for the Everyday Fan Sports. Today I have the pleasure of being on the beat with former NFL quarterback turned lawyer turned author, Mike Boryla. How are you, sir?
Great, John. It's good to be with you. I'm glad to be with a Polish guy from Chicago. That's where my father was from, East Chicago,
Really?
and his parents only spoke Polish. So I learned how to speak Polish when I was a kid visiting East Chicago, Indiana.
Wow. I never knew that. I don't know how to speak Polish, so you got me on that one.
I just do very simple phrases to talk to my grandmother.
Well, that'll get you through though.
Yeah.
Now you had an excellent college career. You went on to play 5 years in the pros. Then you had a career as a lawyer. At some point, you became an author, a writer, a playwright. When did you? I know when you were a lawyer, but how did you start to get into writing then?
Okay, what happened was I discovered I had a writing block uh, when I was 19 years old, my sophomore year at Stanford. I just could not write creative stuff. And I actually had it for about 38 years. And then, oddly enough, what happened was my father had some severe mental problems. Some people thought he was a psychopath, narcissist personality. And it wasn't until about 12 years ago that I made a decision that I was going to totally get away from my father and never see him again and never hear his voice again, never let him touch me again. He was always kind of a touchy-feely guy. And what happened was when I got away from him, I actually started writing 3 weeks later. And
Wow.
I've really been a full-time writer for over 12 years. And I write 5 mornings a week in coffee shops for about 4 hours. And I've done that for 12 years. So if you read the book by Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, I've gotten 15,000 hours in as a writer of these very small, short stage plays and screenplays for movies and novellas for books.
Now, your first book, I believe, was Mark of the Beast.
Mark of the Beast is a audio book, and you can listen to it. It's 2.5 hours. I had a world-class actor do the voices for it, and there's 28 voices. Paul Rohrer is 27 of the voices, and my friend Roger Rod, who's an actor, is the 28th voice. And then they have 64 hours. It took them 64 hours to make the sound effects in there.
Wow.
It's actually like an audio movie. Very unusual. It is called Mark of the Beast, Bible prophecy book. Just to let you know, I do consider myself a prophet. And it is my Bible prophecy audio book.
And after that, more recently, or at some point, you started to develop the disappearing quarterback. Now, I know there's a book coming out now, but there's a more of a history with disappearing quarterback than just the upcoming book. Could you tell us about that?
Okay, what happened was the Lord told me when I was in my 5th year in pro ball that I was to leave and not look back. And that football was like Sodom to me, like in Sodom and Gomorrah, place of death and destruction, which I had no idea why that was. So I left and never did another interview for 35 years. And there's a book, a picture book called Great Ones, NFL Quarterbacks from Vaught to Montana. And in there's this huge picture of me, full-page picture. And then on the opposite page, the guy talks about my career. And at the end, he says, and then he disappeared, never to be heard from again. And so what happened was I came back, the Lord sent me back to Philadelphia to write a one-man play. And so I spent a year writing, working with my friend Roger Rod, who is the only other person in the United States to write and perform his own one-man football play as well, called Footsteps. And I wrote it in a year, and then I performed it 50 times in Philadelphia in front of mostly sold out audiences. And it's called The Disappearing Quarterback. I did convert it into an audio book. So if anybody wants to listen to the audio book, it's called The Disappearing Quarterback, and it is an audio book. It only took an hour to record it because on the stage, it took 85 minutes because I moved around a lot. And oddly enough, in the theater, they call movement on stage blocking. So I moved around a lot on the stage, but when I was just in the recording studio, it only took me an hour to record it. So it is recorded, The Disappearing Quarterback. And then after spending 15,000 hours learning how to write these small things, I wrote a memoir of my life in 6 weeks, 4 months ago. And it's called The Case of the Disappearing Quarterback. I wrote it in 6 weeks. Took me 12 years to learn how to write it in that quick time. And it is going to come out with Zondervan next month. It'll be a hard copy book, and the audiobook version of it will also come out next month, and it's being recorded next week.
And that's about your entire life, your career, everything?
It's about my entire life. The very first scene, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the very first scene, okay? In the very first scene, there's a basketball game in 1958 in Philadelphia, of all places. And they're playing the New York Knicks. And this huge coach, whose nickname was Moose when he was an all-pro basketball player, walks out on the court with a 6-year-old little boy holding his hand. And he lets this 6-year-old little boy sit down on the bench of the New York Knicks in the Philadelphia arena. And he tells him, "You better be good. If you're not, you're never coming to a game again." And he walked away, and then Carl Braun, who was their star, I really liked him. He came up to me and patted me on the head and said, "Mike, we're really excited to have you on the bench with us." And he was really happy I was there. My dad got a technical foul called on in the game. He went berserk, absolutely berserk. He was slamming up and down the court right in front of me. And then he got another technical foul called on. He got 2 technical fouls on him. He is going berserk. And he's 6'5" and weighs 265. And these little referees are like 5'7" and about 135 pounds. And they're scared to death of this guy. He is going absolutely nuts. They call a 3rd technical foul on him, and he freaks out. They throw him out of the game.
Wow.
NBA head coach, the New York Knicks, the legendary New York Knicks. He refuses to leave and is going certifiably insane in front of the bench.
And in front of you.
And I'm right there. I'm right there watching it. It's my first memory of my life. I'm 6 years old. And I was very shy then, very, very shy and very quiet. And oddly enough, he is the first and the only NBA coach in the history of the NBA where they had to call armed guards in from outside the arena to escort him out.
Wow.
And guess who I had to sit next to the whole train ride back that night to New York? I had to sit next to Moose because he was my father.
Not a pleasant ride, I'm assuming.
What's that?
Not a pleasant ride back, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And oddly enough, I had an interview with the top sports writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer my second year after I had become MVP. for the Philadelphia Eagles at the Pro Bowl. And he reserved a room for him to have this interview with me, which was very odd. I'd never had that before. We reserved a room. And when we got him in the room, he sat me down. He goes, Mike, I just had to tell you this. But when I was like, I think it was when he was 15, I was 6 or 7, he was 15. I was at the Philadelphia Warriors basketball game when they played the New York Knicks, when your dad went nuts and they had to escort him out of the stadium. I just wanted to tell you that I was sitting behind the bench, the New York bench, and all the people in that area were very scared because your dad was so huge and he was completely out of control. And he said, I was scared. I still can remember being scared at this basketball game. So that was my first memory. And I just thought it was a different way to start a book,
Sure.
right? You know, books are about surprise. And I tried to write this to be the anti-formula sports movie that Sylvester Stallone had wrote. There's a formula sports movie that is made into 25 different sports movies, and it's the same script. Everything is in the same spot throughout the movie. Invincible, who I was in that movie, Vince Valley, is a formula sports movie. So I wrote this to be the anti-formula sports movie. I challenge anybody who reads this book to every 10 minutes after you read a scene, if they can figure out what the next scene is going to be. And I guarantee you will not be able to figure out what is the next scene, because I was determined to write an anti sports formula thing. I have converted this into a screenplay for a movie, and Jude Pago, who's a producer and director, award-winning, world famous, and I are going to be meeting for the second time in February to maybe take steps to turn this into a movie.
Now, in the whole process of, even before it was the case of disappearing quarterback, when it was just a disappearing quarterback back then, through this whole process, what have you gotten out of it? What have you taken away from it? Have you learned anything about yourself or your life?
Oh, one of the things that's very important, you know, I was told by a classmate of mine, Hillary Shockley, who was my fullback at Stanford, who was a major character in the case of disappearing quarterback. And he was my black fullback, a really good friend of mine. He turned down pro football to become to go to Harvard Law School on full scholarship. But you know what he told me? He told me, I remember him telling me, he was so brilliant. And he said, Mike, go to law school after you played pro ball. He turned down pro ball and went to law school. But I played pro ball first, then I went to law school. And we also discussed about how reading, he was so well read. He knew Aristotle, Socrates, he knew everybody. He said, Mike, you have to continue to read and educate yourself throughout your life. And when you get a chance, start writing. It is through writing that you really get smarter and you really get to know yourself better. But you're right, it was a cathartic experience for me to write my memoir.
Now, afterwards, obviously you had a 5-year career. You know, I've read the interviews with you online. No regrets about leaving football?
Does what?
Do you have any regrets about leaving football after 5 years?
Oh, no. Oh, if anything, if I had to do it over again, and I spoke to a middle school of 110 middle schoolers a few years ago and about 30 teachers. And they had a crew that asked me questions afterwards. And they asked me to go, this one guy asked me this question, what would you do differently if you went back to Stanford again? And I go, that's a very good question. And I told them, if I went back to Stanford today, knowing what I know today about CPU, I would not have played football. I went there on a basketball scholarship. I would have stuck with basketball. And I know how much I love stage acting. And instead of being a political science major, which I was, I would have joined the drama department because I would have met Sigourney Weaver there, and she would have picked me to star with her in The Year of Living Dangerous instead of that mediocre Aussie Mel Gibson.
Oh, you would have been better than Mel. Absolutely.
Yeah, I could have handled that much better than that guy. He's no good.
Easy, easy. No, so why did you choose football then instead of basketball?
I think probably because my dad was a Pro Bowl basketball player. He threatened me. He tried to get me to quit football when I was in high school because I had all these scholarships to Notre Dame and all these places in basketball. And said, "You're not going to play football. You're going to get hurt. If you get hurt, you're never going to play football. You don't want to play football. You want to play basketball." And he actually tried to convince me not to go to Stanford because I would never play football there because they had the Bay Area player of the decade going to Stanford on football scholarship. And a friend of his who was the general manager of the San Francisco Warriors called up my dad and said he had read that I was thinking about going there, but that this Jesse Freitas was such a big deal in the Bay Area that they would never let me play ahead of him. And he said, "Don't think you're going to play at Stanford because you won't." But anyway, I became an All-American quarterback at Stanford. I have the weekend scene when I was flown to Chicago to have my picture taken at the Playboy Club, and Shocker and I were there, and how bizarre it was there. And it got so obscene that I felt I had to take a cab back to my hotel room at the Playboy Penthouse Towers by myself. And there I spent the rest of the evening studying the book of Isaiah and the book of Jeremiah by myself in my hotel room after a very pathetic evening with just craziness there.
No, that brings up a point I meant to ask you earlier. You mentioned that the Lord guided you to writing. How did that, through what? Through dreams, through just a long process, through prayer? How did you get that message?
Oh, well, oddly enough, I used to tell my son, Pete, when I wrote my first play, it was actually about Joseph in the book of Genesis back in Egypt 3,500 years ago. When I was writing it, it took me 9 months to write it. And then it was only about 45 pages long. And I used to tell him that I would write it in the day and do my editing in my dreams at night. I'm serious. I would be writing it, and then I remember this one night I had this one scene, I go, oh, I would have to put these tattoos on the face of the woman who tried to seduce Joseph, and then he got thrown in jail when she falsely accused him of adultery. And then in the second half of my dreams, I said, "Oh no, don't put tattoos on her face. In fact, don't even have her in the screenplay." And so I didn't even have her in the screenplay. I took her out totally. And then all this occurred during the dream. So I used to tell my son that I write during the day and then I edit during my dreams.
You know what? I mean, it's funny because I kind of do the same thing when I'm writing an article. If I get stuck on something, I just go to sleep, and either as I'm sleeping or in my dreams, and somehow the wording tends to fall into place. And by the next morning, I'm ready to finish it. So I could totally relate to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do that, and the thing about it is too is, and I told my wife this. I go, when I told her I was having all these dreams. There's a verse, when I was 29, I had a vision, okay, about my lifeline. But now that I'm an old man, I have all these dreams. There's a verse that says, "Your old men shall dream dreams and your young men shall see visions."
But it keeps you going.
Yes, it does. I'm 71 years old, and people freaked out, especially my football friends, when I was on stage doing 85-minute one-man play with it completely not missing a beat.
I've seen some of the videos and I loved it. I really can't wait can't wait for this book to come out. I'm really looking forward to this book. What I love is when the book does come out, I'd love for you to come back on and we can talk about the book, and more about the book.
About what?
I said, when the book comes out, I'd love to get another update from you, talk to you again.
Okay.
After I read the
When
book.
it comes out, let's do another interview. In fact, send me your P.O. box and I'll send you an autographed copy of it and you can read it. And also, just one thing I wanted to tell you.
Absolutely.
I wrote this for young people, high school, middle school, and young adults, because they have been so traumatized in the last 4 years with the COVID world that they are really dealing with depression and a lot of stuff. So I wrote it for young people to read and to be an encouragement to them. And so in there's a lot of humor. I put a lot of humor in there, but I also showed them how I had to deal with a lot of trauma. And I do have I've been told by psychologists that I have something called post-traumatic stress disorder. And so consequently, when I write about my football career, it's a little bit odd because I can't remember the games. I have to meet with my football friends to tell me what happened during the games, because I remember all the fun things outside of the game, but during the games, I was under so much stress because I called all my own plays from the time I was in 3rd grade until I got through with pro football. So
Wow.
I was the offensive coordinator and the quarterback. Now, offensive coordinators call the plays, quarterbacks don't.
Right.
I was calling all my own plays. And, I remember, like, in high school, the principal calling me into his office to have lunch with him one day, calling me out of class. Everybody looked at me and go, "What? Did you get in trouble?" And I went down to the principal's office and he was quizzing me on my play calling the last game. And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Mike, you're the best passer in the state. That one drive, you didn't call any pass plays. Why did you run the ball the whole 3rd quarter? You're the best passer in the state. You're the best passer in the history of Regis High School for 100 years. And I told him, I said, "You have to realize, Father," he was the principal, Father Hardbach, "that our biggest game was the next week, and that Random, who was much bigger than us, was scouting this game. And so I wanted them to think that we were a running team."
Smart.
And so rather than, I knew when we played Random, we would have to throw the ball 30 times in order to beat them because they were so much bigger than us. And so what I did was, the game before, we were so much better than them, I ran the ball most of the time in the second half, just so I could have their scouts see all these running plays. And then we put in 3 or 4 play action passes for the second half, which turned out well, and we beat Random in a big game. But I mean, that's the kind of stress I was under, that, people were, athletic director at Stanford calling me into his office, wanting to talk, about my play calling. It's a lot of stress.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt. No doubt.
Plays, and you're an All-American quarterback at Stanford and a Pro Bowl quarterback at Philadelphia. And I was a different guy, because I was pretty shy and quiet, and I'm basically an intellectual. I'm a Renaissance man. I heard the term Renaissance man when I was in high school, and that's basically what I am. To a certain extent, I consider myself a faux athlete. I'm really a reader and researcher, kind of a guy like Hillary Shockley, a real academic type of guy, rather than a diehard athlete. So that's why it was so easy for me to quit pro football. One of the other reasons why it was easy for me to quit pro football was I left a huge amount of money on the table. Huge amount of money. I had a contract. If I would have finished it, I would have gotten paid a huge amount of money every year for the following 15 years. I walked away from it all. And one of the reasons why it was easy to walk away from it was my mentor at Regis High School, which 50% of this book is about Regis High School, was a guy named Father Bakewell. He was my Latin teacher and my religion teacher. And we all knew at Regis Jesuit High School, that Father Bakewell was the multi-millionaire heir to the Bethlehem steel fortune. And we all knew, every single one of us at Regis knew, that he took a vow of poverty to teach us. And so when I was sitting there and the Lord told me to walk from all this money, I just remember thinking, hey, it's not about money. Look at Father Bakewell. He gave up the whole hundreds of millions of the Bethlehem steel fortune and walked from that. And you can walk from this too, right? So it was very easy for me to walk from the money.
Wow. Look, I very, very much appreciate your time. I remember following you as a kid. I remember the Pro Bowl. I remember the whole thing. I remember you going to Tampa. I collected your football cards. I was a big fan of yours back in the day. It really has been a thrill to talk to you. I can't wait to read the book. I seriously can't wait to read it. And I would love to talk to you again once the book is out and I've read it. I would love to talk to you again because I'm sure I'll have a lot more questions coming out.
Okay. Well, you know what I'll do, John? I'm going to email you the finalized script because my Zondervan, their two editors, got through with it about a month ago, and I'll let you look at it and read that.
Wow. That would be amazing. That would be great. Well, I appreciate your time. If people should follow you, they can follow you online. They can just look up The Case of the Disappearing Quarterback. I know it's going to be available after New Year. They can follow my site. I'll be giving updates. As soon as I hear anything about the book, I will be printing information about it. We want to direct as many people as possible to your book because you've led a fascinating life. And I'm sure everybody will love it as much as I can't wait to read it. So I thank you for your time. It's really been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure too, John.
Thank you very much, sir. And we'll talk again.
Okay. Goodbye.